Now, today's big announcement came from the government, and it is a deal with the Turkish government. They say our partnership with Turkey, a close friend and ally, will enable our law enforcement agencies to work together on this international problem and tackle the small boat supply chain. Well, it might help a bit, but it won't really make any difference. But hey, if you believe some of the polling out today, Labour are on course for an absolutely stonking majority. Now, there's a long way to go, but either way, they're certainly the bookies' favourites. And they've come up with their own 5-point plan. And I've joined here in the studio by Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. Peter, 5-point plan, not very imaginative, really, is it?
I wouldn't say that at all. And, they often say that flattery is the greatest compliment. We now have the government starting to pick through bits of Labour's plan for themselves. So a couple of years ago, Tory ministers were saying, not sure if we're friends with France. Labour, since 2016, has been calling for closer cooperation. Another point from Labour's plan, and to save time, I won't read it all out.
No, sure.
What was trying to tackle these issues at source. So now, 7 years on from perhaps the public recognition of the crisis in Britain, again, the Tories are trying to tackle the migrant crisis at source, as Labour suggested. Now, there's 5 different points on the plan, but it would seem like in a very lethargic and piecemeal way, the government are trying to pick up what Labour's been proposing.
All right, I mean, we can't go through all of it, but let's just deal with the new agreement with France that you've just mentioned. France won't be allowed to make an agreement on this because the European Union now manages asylum policy as a whole. They have a lot of arguments over it, but they do manage it as a whole. And so we would need to do an agreement with the EU on this, not just with France. And they've been given the hundreds of thousands crossing the Mediterranean, it's not really going to happen, is it?
Well, we've got to disaggregate 2 different things. The deal announced this week was with Turkey.
Yes.
We've already got agreements with France. Some folk in this country believe we're wrong to pay money to France. The alternative is we give France nothing and allow the problem to get worse. And my concern, there's a lot of politics in it, and we know that immigration is very important to swing voters.
Yeah.
But people are dying. People are dying in war-torn countries. They're then at risk when they come to Turkey. They're then at risk again when they get on a small boat. And then at risk here, not necessarily of death, thank goodness, but of serious disease because of the botched management of processing centres like Manston. So these people have been at risk all the way through their journey.
What about,
they've become a political...
What about the risk to people in Britain? Because some of these people that are coming are serious criminals. What about the risk to us?
Well, you say some. How many?
Too many. And if you look particularly at, and we've taken some action, but the extent to which Albanians who've been encouraged to cross the channel, open adverts on TikTok, come and join criminal gangs, and you talk to police forces all over Britain, it's a real problem.
Well, I would challenge on that because while there's obviously crime in every country, you're not offering any statistics to support what you're saying. There's crime in Britain. We've got to trust our police to do the job. But these people are fleeing war, and, I've been to another war-torn...
They're not.
Some are.
They're not. Many of them are now coming from the subcontinent of India. Others are coming from countries all over the world. And even if there are genuine refugees among them, we're not handling it well. Look, there's no question the public are upset about this. They see a sense of injustice and unfairness. Huge social waiting lists, for British people. They see people coming in and, as they perceive it, getting everything. And by the way, whatever the Tories come up with, there's a round tonight between Robert Jenrick and Lee Anderson. Jenrick says our policies are working. Anderson says they're not. But one thing that really interested me was, it was said today in the 5-point plan, Labour would clear the backlog and end hotel use. How on earth are they going to end hotel use? There are 50,000 people currently in hotels.
Well, Labour have got tons of ideas which the government are gradually pinching. So one was to spend the Rwanda money. I have to remind your viewers, 0 people sent to Rwanda so far.
140 million quid.
To spend the Rwanda money on a cross-border force, so closer cooperation with France, but also with other countries like Turkey. Clearing the backlog, I think, will take time. If they win, it's obviously not going to take a day or a week. I'd imagine it will take several months. But at the moment, the government seems to be spending money on triaging a problem while falling out with our neighbours like France. Labour want closer cooperation, and they want this cross-border force, because we know putting folk in hotels, let alone on a barge that's
where are you going to put them?
A prison ship.
Where are you going to put them?
It's disgraceful.
Where are you going to put them?
We need faster processing. Processing has slowed down.
Okay.
And when you talked about criminals, Nigel, again, I have to challenge you. You didn't use any statistics.
Well,
I'll give you
over 10% of the prison population is now foreign-born. Part of that is what is happening with illegal migration into Britain.
Well, that's so generic, because your point was about Albania, and then you have a stat...
Albania's a massive problem.
Let me give you a stat. The Home Office is processing 10,000 fewer claims per year than it used to. So we can all agree, left or right, under this government, it is less effective by any given statistical measure of tackling it.
And would Labour's
people's lives are at risk.
Would Labour's solution to the backlog be just let everyone stay?
Of course not. And I'm sure some folk on the Tory backbenchers say that. Labour, I think, have wised up over the last decade. They recognise public concern over immigration as a perfectly reasonable thing. But I'd also remind you, in your statistic-free zone, that Labour has a narrow lead on public trust on immigration, according to Ipsos Mori.
I know.
Narrow lead.
We are on course this year. Who's to say? Maybe 60, 70,000 people will cross the English Channel this year, I would guess. That's about what it's going to be. 50,000 in hotels. Yes, processing is slow. But here's the biggest problem, Peter. When people are found not to have a valid asylum claim, actually sending them back anywhere has proved to be almost impossible with our own courts and the ECHR. And Labour can't solve that.
Well, the key thing, really, is about how the law is drafted and by judges, because there's been the biggest deflection exercise of the last 10 years to blame this on lawyers or quote-unquote lefty lawyers. Lefty lawyers, as if they're all the same. A lawyer takes an oath to represent their client to the best of their ability based on their training. So the government pass the laws and then the government blame other people when they feel the laws are not working. If the laws are not working, that is the government's fault. And if people are being taken off a plane at midnight in the name of justice, that's decided in the interest of fairness.
Well, yes, and indeed, we've seen murderers taken off planes at midnight as a result of campaigns.
Well, then the government has to get it right.
Labour oppositions. Final thought on this. I can see what Labour is saying. To be honest, what they're saying is not very different to what the government's saying. Not very different, going through these points. Do you actually believe that a Labour government, which we may well have, September, October next year with a big majority, do you actually think there's anything in these 5 points will stop the votes coming?
Yeah, I think that will take time, and I'll give you two quick reasons. One is because I think Labour are pragmatic, and the reason the 5 points aren't on the front pages every day, because they're not exciting, they're not sexy, but they're actually about doing the detailed work, spending money in the right places. The other point is Rishi Sunak swings between ideology, say some mean things about sending folk to Rwanda, and total pragmatism, where he is running terrified of Tory backbenchers. I'm sure you'd agree with this. Just like Liz Truss did, just like Boris Johnson did occasionally, and just like David Cameron did. They are terrified of the Tory backbenchers, and the Tory backbenchers are dictating Conservative government policy.
They're terrified of a majority public opinion in this country. The majority of people are appalled by what's happening in the Channel.
I think we're all appalled at people dying. The question is what you do about it. Do you have a row with France and tell fibs about sending people to Rwanda when it's not happening? Or do you actually get in the weeds of the detail?
They might have gone to Rwanda, but for a court in Strasbourg.